Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Endless Party. As always, we are so thrilled to have you here with us.
Mm-hmm.
As you can tell, Meg is very enthused.
I'm super excited.
Yeah. So, what are we going to discuss today?
What are we going to discuss today?
Well, this world has a habit, nay, an obsession with competing and comparing.
Ooh.
And I think we all have this habit. It's become a sixth sense, if you will. It's just become second nature. All of us naturally just begin to compare with anybody who walks into the room. And social media just adds to this addiction. We scroll endlessly through videos, podcasts, like this one, or other platforms, and we see everybody living this grand lifestyle. And we immediately start to compare their greatest talents to our greatest weaknesses, which isn't fair or right by any comparison whatsoever. And so, how do we combat this? How do we overcome comparing and competing when it is as habitual as breathing?
Right.
Well, that's what we hope to answer today.
Yes. So, if it is as habitual as it is for us to breathe, how are we going to combat this? Well, we have 3 methods to help us stop this detrimental habit of comparison. And before we jump in, I want to say this podcast was inspired by a really great devotional by the man of J.D. Hawes.
Yep, you're right.
So, if you want to hear a really great devotional, he probably will do a better job than us, honestly.
He does an amazing
He's
job.
so
I
great.
think it's called Wrestling with Comparison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hop online and look it up because it's amazing. So, a lot of what we're taking is going to be from his
It's
his devotional,
speech, and then we've just incorporated a lot of other speakers and insights from people to really just combat this.
Right. Okay, so let's jump into the 3 things. Number 1 is going to be awareness. Number 2 is humility. And number 3 is lose yourself and think about other people.
Yes. So number 1, awareness is power. Right? As soon as you become aware of something, whether it be a habit such as comparison or something else, that is ultimately when you can begin to take control of it, because now you are aware of it.
In the devotional, he compares comparison to the habit of breathing, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, and he says mindfulness is a way that we practice and control our breathing. So awareness is a way that we can practice and control comparison. Anyways.
Yeah, that's phrased really well.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So honestly, as soon as I listen to his devotional and as I've been on runs and as I've been, with my own thoughts, as soon as my need to fault find and compare myself to other people pops into my head, I can immediately be like, oh, well, I'm doing this, I'm comparing right now, so why don't I think about something else? And it's easy for me to just, put a little pin in the thought and move on to something that's more positive and better for my life.
I think that's awesome. It's actually interesting because really we are in such a comparison and competitive world. I mean, every aspect of our life is competing. You compete for jobs, you compete for grades, you compete for the prize at the end of the race. No matter what, you're competing. And so it's interesting to kind of ask yourself, how do I stop comparing and how do I stop competing in a world that is so competition oriented and comparison oriented? And so the big thing is that the only person that you have to compete against is yourself. That's it. Like, you really shouldn't be striving to compete against anybody other than who you were yesterday. I truly wish, especially looking back on sports, that I just competed against myself more so than my opponents. And this is kind of sidestepping from even our notes, but I really look back at the races that I wasn't that successful because I was worried about
my competition.
Yeah, the competition. I was worried about the other people in the race. When really all I had to worry about is doing the best that I absolutely could and being a little bit better than who I was yesterday.
Right. And in sports, it's really hard, right? Because you're told that you're competing for the first place prize, or, if coaches see that your time is out of the water and you're most likely going to win, then they'll tell you your race is against the clock.
Right.
But in all reality, your race is against yourself.
Yeah.
You're trying to race better than your last race.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping, well, we'll see. We want our girls to run. We think it'll be super fun.
Super cool.
And that's one of the things I want to tell them is, look, your race isn't against B. Your race isn't against Winnie. It's against yourself. What's
Right.
the best you can give today? And did this best outperform your last best? And if your answer is yes, then, congrats. That's great. That's a great performance.
It's actually pretty cool because having twins is the perfect opportunity as parents to combat comparison. You can either combat it or you can dive right in and start comparing. So you can go one of two ways, right? And I've actually seen it done both ways. I have some family friends that also have twins that all they do is compare their twins. And then on the flip side, we have twins and we're striving to only compare them to who they are and who they can become.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been interesting because immediately...
Every single time somebody meets our twins, I just jumped in.
No,
okay.
You're good.
Every single time somebody meets our twins, the first thing that they start to do is compare them. And they say, well, how do you tell them apart? They want to know what makes them each other different from the other. And Elijah and I can genuinely say, I can't describe why B is different than Winnie other than she's B and Winnie's Winnie. And people who aren't around them 24/7 like us will even start to say things like, oh, well, B's nose is just a touch more pointed, or Winnie has a little bit slenderer of a face. And Elijah and I always look at each other. Those are just completely false. They come up with the randomest ways to
twins.
yeah, they come up with the randomest things that I'm like, I have never noticed this in my baby who I've been with for a year. Anyways, so the whole point of that is when people ask us how we can tell them apart, we're like, we just can't. Because to us, they're completely different people, and B is B and Winnie's Winnie. And the only reason why they're different from each other is because they're two different people. It doesn't have to do with anything other than who they are.
Yeah. What's actually kind of cool is one of the things that Meg just mentioned is whenever somebody tries to point out their differences, it's always in a negative way.
Yes.
It's never positive.
No.
Right? They're never like, wow, B is just so happy and smiley, and Winnie just laughs nonstop.
Saying the same thing, but in two different ways.
Right.
It's always
like, oh, she has a really flat head.
Or
she's got a bald spot on the back of her hair. Or, oh, she has spider veins coming across her face. It's always something very negative. And so they try to point out the things that are faults in others.
Yes.
Rather than the strengths. And that's what's fascinating about having twins, specifically for this podcast episode, is because we do the same thing with other people that people do with our twins.
Yes.
We immediately start to compare our greatest weaknesses to other people's greatest strengths. And why?
I don't know.
It's crazy that it's become so habitual, just as Mr. Is it Hawes?
Yeah.
Mr. Hawes says, as breathing.
We don't even think we're doing.
No,
we don't even recognize it.
Walks into the room and they say something clever or something funny.
Oh, why didn't I think of that?
Right. Immediately start to compare yourself.
Oh, she's so witty. I must not be as funny. Oh my gosh, I just went to this house and they had a beautiful home and she makes such good food. Wow, she's really on top of every single aspect in her life, and I must be a loser because I'm not as on top of my stuff as she is. This is real things.
Right. And it's genuine, right? And so we all do the same thing that people are trying to do with our little girls. Mm-hmm. They're turning 1 in a couple days, and people are already trying to find the greatest weaknesses within each other so that they can tell them apart.
It's so sad, but we don't let them. When they say things, we're always like, oh yeah. I don't. I was like, no, not really. I don't think so.
Well, it's funny because they even say things like, "Is B just a little angrier than Winnie?"
We're like,
or
no.
Is Winnie just a little more shy? No.
No, that's
It's
not
like any
this at
given,
all.
it's every single baby. Babies are going to be a little fussier one day. Babies are going to be a little happier one day, just like we are all in a happier and fussier state on any given day. And so when I look at that and they start to compare, it boggles my mind. And it really has helped us, like I said, raise awareness to the fact of how often we compare. It's actually interesting because having B and Winnie as siblings, not just twins, but siblings, really emphasizes that we never want to compare our children to each other.
Yeah, not even just like our twins. Like when we have other kids one day, we don't want to compare any one of them to each other.
Yeah. I actually have a story about this. So I have a brother. He's 2 years younger than me. He's in med school right now.
He is smart, you
He's a
guys.
genius.
Like
he's a
98%
whiz, right?
on medical tests, like wicked smart.
Yeah.
The kid in class that you hate that sets the curve.
That there is no curve.
There's no
because
curve.
he's in class. So in high school, I was all bronze, no brains, and he was all brains, no bronze, which isn't true.
It's not true at
I
all.
was actually a straight A student, and he was a killer athlete.
But that's what they were told.
But that's what we were told all the time because I won 13 state championships, and he didn't win one. But this is the kicker. He came in third his freshman year, and
Which
I
is
won.
amazing.
And we celebrated over the moon when he took third at the state championship. Mind you, I just won that state championship and nobody even really batted an eye. Then on the flip side,
He's in all the AP classes.
he's in honors, APs, everything. I bring home an A+ on a test. I am praised and lavishly, just enthused by my parents. On the flip side, he comes home with his 80th A+, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, whatever. It's just expected. And what's interesting is we were scripted as these kids. And so no wonder I was this killer athlete. That's what I was told my whole life. And no wonder he was an incredible student. That's what he was told his whole life. And no fault to my parents. They actually were trying to point out our strengths.
Yes.
Right? But in so doing, they also pointed out our quote-unquote weaknesses. And I don't want to do that as a parent.
No.
Nobody does.
No one even realizes they are doing it.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why awareness is so big when it comes to comparisons, and especially as a parent to your children. You need to be aware of what you are saying to your kids.
It matters.
Yeah.
It really does. There's a quote. It goes, "Try not to compare your children, even if you think you are skillful at it. You may say most positively that Susan is pretty and Sandra is bright, but all Susan will remember is that she isn't bright, and Sandra that she isn't pretty. Praise each child individually for what that child is and help him or her escape our culture's obsession with comparing, competing, and never feeling that we are enough."
Well said.
Do it.
It's true, though. When you point these things out, that is what their kids remember. I mean, even just the example that I gave.
Like, oh, I must not be
that bright.
smart.
And Malachi must not be that great at sports.
Not true.
It's not true. And so just be really mindful and be aware of the things that you are saying, not only to your kids, but to everybody.
One of the principles I learned about 2 years ago, it's by Stephen Covey. He brought this to light in his book, and it literally changed my life. I'm serious. And it helped me to combat my habit of comparison. And it's his law of abundance and scarcity. And for some reason in our culture and society, it is, publicized that there is only a finite amount of success. That there's only a little bit of success out there in our world, and that only a few people are going to ever be in possession of it.
Right.
That it's scarce, that success is scarce. But this is so far from the truth. Success is actually a principle of abundance. There is enough success out there for everybody to have their full share of it. And so when I see something really good happening in another person's life, it doesn't take anything away from me, and it doesn't take away any future success that I could potentially have. A good story of this is we have a friend who's building their dream home on the hill, It is amazing. It's gorgeous. It's quite frankly everything Elijah and I hope to one day have. But we were in a situation and everyone was just criticizing, this person for their success. And because what they were doing is they were comparing their homes with the new home that this man's building.
Mm-hmm.
But Elijah and I was like, this is awesome. He's building his dream home. And just because he has his dream home on the hill doesn't mean that I can't have mine.
Yeah.
Just because so-and-so is gorgeous one day and is in a killer outfit and is rocking it doesn't mean that I can't have that same moment too. Just because people have a lot of money or they're talented in one area or things seem to be going right doesn't mean that the same things can't be going right for you, because they can. There's enough success for everybody, so you don't have to compare, your failures to other people's successes, because you can always obtain success.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's interesting because it just goes back to the principle of your contest is not with anybody but yourself. Ever. In any way, shape, or form. I even just look at it with every business out there that they put employees against each other to who can get the Christmas bonus, who can get this, who can get that. And it's never against your fellow employees or your colleagues. It's always against yourself. How much can you do? How much further can you push? How much can you take before having to give in? It's always against yourself. But what's so interesting to me, though, is that's not how God or Jesus works.
No. Thank heavens.
Yeah, thank heavens. They don't compare us to anybody other than who we should be and who we can be.
This reminds me of the perfect quote. It's by Jeffrey R. Holland, and he goes, God doesn't measure our talents or our looks. He doesn't measure our professions or our possessions. He cheers on every runner, calling out that the race is against sin, not against each other.
Yeah. Case in point.
The race is not against someone else. It's against yourself.
Yeah. And it's your ability to conquer your own demons and your own trials and your own tribulations. It's never against
outperforming
the Joneses next door, or outperforming somebody else. It's only outperforming who you can be.
The last thing we want to share in this awareness portion is the classic quote by Teddy Roosevelt, and it is that comparison is the thief of joy.
It really is.
And it is.
It's actually detrimental how hurtful and awful comparison really can be.
It will take away all your joy and make you
everything.
unhappy.
Yeah. Don't believe me, just go scroll on social media for about an hour.
See how you feel inside. See if you're feeling warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, she's going to be feeling real good.
Okay, so we just covered awareness. Now we're going to jump into humility. And humility is actually a principle that Elijah and I have been trying to understand. I feel like we've really been studying it this year, and it's been really cool because we've been learning a lot about what humility isn't, which is helping us get closer to finding what humility is.
Right.
So I'll let you share the quote that's perfect for this section.
It's by C.S. Lewis, and he says, "Do not imagine that if we meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be a person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all." And that actually really just blew us away.
I loved that quote so much.
Because it really just takes you a step back. And because I think so many people, including myself at one point, had this misunderstanding that in order to be humble, you had to shirk off praise. You had to shirk off who you were. And you really had to push aside that you were just some
Like
nobody.
you had to be a shadow almost.
Yes.
Like not a
Like
presence,
a
just
shell.
like, oh, just a shadow floating along with
Right.
no substance.
Which is, it couldn't be farther from the truth, because Jesus Christ himself was the most humble person to ever walk the earth. But he was no doormat. He was no shadow. In fact, the shadow that he casted is now keeping shelter to how many how many billion people are Christian?
Lots.
A lot. But it's amazing because really that's what humility is. You can be a very strong, confident person of integrity that is absolutely upstanding and honest and have all of these good virtues, but you would never even be thinking about yourself or those good virtues. That's what it means to be humble.
I love this quote, and I was actually listening to the devotional before I had the opportunity to go into a social situation. And it was really cool because as soon as I stepped into that social situation, I was like, okay, this is my goal. I want to make other people feel that there is something inside of themselves. And instead of going and talking about myself, I tried to go and listen to what they had to say and make them feel like a somebody. I think we all have met people who we've been in conversation with, and we chat and chat and chat and chat with them. And when the conversation's over, we feel so good inside, and all we can think about is how good that person made us feel. And when in all reality, all they really did was listen and say, like we did all the talking. And yet after that conversation, all we can think about is how that person made us feel, even though all they did was maybe they didn't do much of the talking. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
No, absolutely. Like, when you are in a conversation with somebody that all they do is completely engage with you and focus on your needs,
that's a humble
your
person.
desires, that's not only a humble person, but it's also a person of love, because they are genuinely reaching out to you as a friend.
And it's a good feeling.
It's a great feeling.
I think it's one of the best feelings in the world, honestly.
Well, yeah, it's one of there's an age-old phrase that reads, not everybody will remember everything you said, but everybody will remember how you made them feel. And it's true. I look back on the conversations that I had with my friends, like the people that I truly, truly care about. I could not tell you a single thing any of us said in those conversations, but I can tell you that I was genuinely happy. You know, and I look at the nights that me and Meg have our pillow talk conversations.
I don't know. Exactly.
We don't know we cannot recall everything that we said to each other.
But I feel good.
But we feel great. We'll stay up till 1 or 2 a.m. just talking.
So bad.
And then we'll be exhausted the next day because we have to get up with the kids.
So bad.
But it's because we remember how we made each other feel. And it was that's what humility is.
There's a perfect quote that I'm going to read. It's by Dieter F. Uchtdorf. And what it does is it, one, encompasses humility, and two, it transitions us into the next section, which is all about forgetting yourself and thinking of others. So it reads, when we see the world around us through the lens of I'm going to start this over. When we see the world around us through the lens of the pure love of Christ, we begin to understand humility. Some suppose that humility is about beating ourselves up. Humility does not mean convincing ourselves that we are worthless, meaningless, or of little value. Nor does it mean denying or withholding the talents God has given us. We don't discover humility by thinking less of ourselves. We discover humility by thinking less about ourselves. Let me repeat that part. We don't discover humility by thinking less of ourselves. We discover humility by thinking less about ourselves.
Well said. I actually find that play on words, one, really, really impressive, but two, really inspiring. Because we never do need to think less about ourselves. In fact, I mean, we should never have an ego thinking that I am the greatest.
No.
But you are great.
Yes.
You should believe that.
But no greater than someone else.
Yes.
That's where it gets
great.
skewed.
But yeah, we should never think less of ourselves, but we should think less about ourselves.
Pretty cool.
That's pretty impressive. So this actually caveats right into exactly what we wanted to discuss further. I hope and pray all of you have seen this movie because it is one of my favorite childhood movies. It's called Little Rascals.
I'm pretty sure I haven't seen this movie. Is it the baseball one?
No, that's The Sandlot. That's also a
I've
classic.
never
But
seen
no,
it.
Little
We need
Rascals.
to watch this.
We do need to watch this. I watched it a million times as a kid because I just loved it. So, a little bit of backstory, and then I'll tell you the part that actually ties into the podcast. But I loved it because Alfalfa had a crush on a girl, and I was the only one of my friends that like had crushes on girls. They're actually in this club called the He-Man Woman Hater Club because they all just hate girls except Alfalfa. He like loves the girl in secret. Anyways, so that's like the premise of the film, and that's why I really liked it because I was the only kid when I was little that like liked girls. Anyways, so there's a part in this movie, and it's one of my favorite parts. Their clubhouse burns down. Actually,
No.
it's Alfalfa's fault
How sad.
because he goes on a date with Darla to their clubhouse, and he lights a little candle, and then he like has to quickly put it away, and then it lights the whole clubhouse on fire. Burns down their clubhouse. So they try to go and secure a loan. Unfortunately, all of these kids are under the age of 10, and they can't secure a loan. So they think they have the bright idea, which I think is pretty clever, to get huge trench coats, stand on each other's shoulders, put on top hats, and then fake beards. And so they walk into this bank, and they're now, a 6 foot, 7 foot guy. And they go into the bank, and fortunately, the banker is not fooled at all because it's an 8-year-old in a fake beard on top of another 8-year-old. But what's cool about this principle is I think it speaks volumes, and it's this understanding that you will never be taller than when someone else is on your shoulders. And it really resonated with me years and years later because when we truly forget all about ourselves, that is when we find, that is where happiness resides. When we truly forget all about ourselves, that is where happiness resides. When we begin to put other people first and forget about our own trials and our own tribulations, that's where we find that we are able to completely just really give love.
There's a beautiful story. It's by Linda K. Burton. And I really like it because I know that each of us struggle with comparison, men and women. I think women have the tendency to compare looks a lot more than men. Maybe not, but I don't know. I just feel like it's very common.
In this world, yeah.
I feel like it's common for women to compare beauty.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's this really cool story, and it's about this girl who was a teenager, and she goes, I remember well the insecurities I felt as a teenager with a bad case of acne. I tried to care for my skin properly. My parents helped me get medical attention. For years, I even went without eating chocolate and all the greasy fast foods around which teens often socialize, but with no obvious healing consequences. It was difficult for me at that time to fully appreciate this body which was giving me so much grief. But my good mother taught me a higher law. Over and over, she said to me, you must do everything you can to make your appearance pleasing, but the minute you walk out the door, forget yourself and start concentrating on others.
Really, like I said, as soon as you start to put others' needs before your own, you forget about all of your troubles.
They go away.
They disappear. Ironically enough, when you put somebody on your shoulders, all your burdens are lightened.
The next story I want to share is actually about our twins, and it's all about forgetting yourself and thinking of others. So, as you know, the twins, B and Winnie, as we've watched them develop this year, there are times when one of them will catch on to something before the other.
Naturally.
Which, they're babies. Every baby
It's different.
complete stages at different times. And I will say this too, anytime someone catches on to a new skill before the other is very fast to catch on. Anyways, so there's this one time that we got this really cool hand-me-down Johnny Jump Up.
probably was built back in like the 80s.
It's like probably a 40 or
Like
50-year-old
my
contraption.
siblings probably used it, and I was born in 1996, and my oldest brother is a 1984 baby, and that's probably when they got it.
Probably.
So it's ghetto.
It's so ghetto, but it matches our home. And what's especially cool about this little apartment is we have these hooks
Yeah.
that are screwed into the beams in our ceiling. Because when our home was built in the 80s as well, they came up with a really cool idea that we'll like hang ceiling lights from chains and plug them into like the wall instead of like putting in ceiling lights. Anyways, so our living room has no light, but we have hooks.
Yep.
That don't have lights on them, just like hooks in our ceiling.
Yep.
But this all came full circle with
Johnny
the Johnny Jump Up, because we could easily hang the Johnny Jump Up in our ceiling. Anyways, okay. So we put B in the Johnny Jump Up, and she went first, and she immediately is having the time of her life. She is so happy to be jumping and playing and getting the freedom of thinking she's standing, you know.
Yeah.
And as she's having the time of her life, Winnie crawls up to her. And there is the biggest, I might cry, there is the biggest smile on Winnie's face. She is so happy for B. She's so happy that her sister has learned this new skill and that she's jumping, and Winnie was so happy for B. Like, so happy. And she just wanted to be around her, and she was laughing and she was playing with her, even though she wasn't the one getting the turn in the Johnny Jump Up. And it was just, it's so cool. And then in contrast, as Winnie got her turn, B was right there cheering Winnie on, excited for her, happy that she was experiencing the joy of this jump up. And it's such a good example of how we should be with our friends and with our family and with everybody. When people are succeeding, we should be happy for them.
Yeah.
Genuinely. Because just because B was jumping in the jumper, it didn't take anything away from Winnie. And Winnie was so happy to share that moment with B.
Right. Well, it just emphasizes that really we're not competitors. We're teammates.
And that's what our twins
that's what
are.
Our daughters are. They're not competitors. They're teammates. They're excited for each other's successes. When Winnie wins, B wins. And when B wins, Winnie wins. Like, no matter what. It's fascinating because, as Meg mentioned, one will learn a skill and the other will actually pattern that skill immediately after. Like, it was funny. So B learned how to scoop first. And so Winnie started to do her own little scoop.
Yes.
And then Winnie actually learned how to crawl. And then B realized that Winnie was a little faster and was getting around places a little better. So B learned to crawl. But it was never this competition. They immediately were like,
I can use that.
This is better. Like, and that's what's so fascinating is we aren't inherently given this habit of comparison. It's learned. Just like every other bad habit in life, it's learned.
Mm-hmm. And B and Winnie are teammates. So, like, Winnie helped B learn to crawl, and B helped Winnie learn to scoop.
Yeah.
And in the end, they actually end up learning every skill they need to learn faster because they have each other to look for, to work with.
They have examples.
Yes.
You know, they can mirror each other. And that's what's so fascinating. Instead of looking at people as this comparison, look at them as an opportunity for you to learn a skill. You know,
utilize them to be your best.
To just really help you to succeed. You know, it goes back full circle to that Stephen Covey principle that success is not a finite material. In fact, it's an infinite material. And so when somebody else has success, use it. Ask them. I guarantee they'll give you the advice that they used in order to obtain the success that they want, just like our little girls. They never once have said that they are really upset that one of them learned a skill first.
No.
And neither of them have said that they're upset if the one is able to pattern that skill after them.
No.
So, be teammates, not competitors.
The last couple thoughts we'd like to share with you guys are all about God. And I entitled this little section, well, how does God compare? So we have a couple thoughts to share with you, and then we'll wrap everything up.
So there's this rabbi by the name of Zusia.
Yeah, Zusia.
So Zusia, Rabbi Zusia, he said, God will not ask me why I wasn't Moses. God will ask me why I wasn't Zusia.
I'm going to change that to Meg. God will not ask me why I wasn't Moses. God will ask me why I wasn't Meg or Elijah.
Mm-hmm. That just goes back to this understanding. God does not compare us to anybody other than who we should be and who we can be. He's not holding a chart with a list of how much money did you make? What was your possessions? What was your profession?
What do you get on that math
How
test?
many kids did you have? How many people did you serve? How many, all of these things. He's not having this tally score and comparing it against Mother Teresa or Bill Gates. It is, in fact, he'll probably just put you in front of a mirror.
That's probably what will happen.
He's not going to compare you to anybody other than who you should be. Ever.
Okay, there's another story I'm really excited for you actually to share. And it comes back to the quote I did share about by Jeffrey R. Holland, but I'm going to start it and just restate it because I thought it was really good. And he goes, God does not compare or measure us based on our wealth, possessions, or looks. He earnestly and completely cheers on every runner.
So ironically enough, I was a runner. And I actually had a stellar coach, my second college coach. My first college coach was garbage, but my second college coach was incredible. And his name was Coach Ed Eyestone. And he coaches at BYU. He's been there for a long time. What it was so incredible about Coach Eyestone is that every single practice, specifically the practices that were hard workout days, he would cheer on every single runner by name at least once. And he never once compared us to his top runners or his lowest runners. He compared us to who he knew we could become and the athletes that he knew we could become. And so I have the utmost respect for Coach Eyestone because he is one person that I truly believe does not compare his athletes to anybody other than who they were yesterday. And I think that's really inspiring and something that all of us can take as an example. Whether it's our kids or whether we are coaches of other teams or whether we are in a business or whatever it is, we don't have to ever compare. We can just cheer on everybody and help them become the best versions of themselves.
I love that so much. The last thing, so within our faith, one day we believe that we are going to meet God again. And, and he's going to interview us, talk to us, judge us, see what we really did in this life.
Yeah.
And one of the leaders of our church explains that, so the focus of the hypothetical interview with God will be the quality of our relationships, with special attention on individuals in our immediate families. Pointedly and deliberately, it was stressed that the Lord will not ask about our professions, but only our integrity. He will not ask for our resume of church service, only our interest in ministering to others. These are the things that really matter. And it kind of helps you to put life back into perspective and take inventory of the things that you are putting, at the top of the list, and then maybe helping you to make some corrections and realize that it's not about comparison. It's all about helping other people and not helping more people than your neighbor is helping as many people as you can.
Right. C.S. Lewis says this. He says, we might think that God wanted simply obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. And it's interesting when we think about this. God's not looking for Moses, who was a prophet, or Elijah, who was a prophet. He's looking for the best version of ourselves. He's looking for us to live up to our full potential, and that's all he ever wanted, and that's all he ever wants. It's just like we are with our own daughters. We do not care if they win gold medals or if they are valedictorian. What we care is that they are the best versions of themselves. And so we hope that these 3 simple aspects of comparison will really help you. Just 1, be aware of comparison in general. Be humble and forget yourself and start thinking of others. Then I know for a fact that when you stand before the judgment bar of God, you won't be worried about anybody other than whether or not you lived up to your potential.
It's a beautiful way to end it. Stop comparing.
Stop comparing. So, until next time, please smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. Share it with friends. And if you haven't already, go do the same thing on all of our platforms.
Yes.
Spotify, Apple, Pandora, all of them.
Your support means the world. We're thankful for you.
We are very thankful for you.
And until next time, peace.